All right, good morning, everyone. Looks like we've got a great group of people here today, so we're very excited to have you all here. My name is Shannon DiMarco. I'm the Administrative Director of Clinical Simulation and Emergency Education at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and at UW Health. And I'm very excited to be welcoming all of you here today to hear our presentation on how does our Code of Ethics inform excellence in a new era. This is completed to us by the team from the UIC College of Medicine Simulation and Integrative Learning Institute, or as we like to call, you'll hear later, it's called SAIL. Before I read the bios of our presenters, I would like to thank them all for being here and preparing this presentation for us. And just to remind everybody that if you want any questions today throughout this presentation, to please put them in the chat. We are keeping everyone muted if possible. I'll be moderating questions at the end of the session, so feel free to put those notes in the chat, and I'm happy to ask those questions of our panelists when the time comes. So let's go ahead and introduce our team from SAIL. So first we have Dr. Christine Park, who is a Director of Simulation and Integrative Learning Institute at the University of Illinois College of Medicine. Dr. Park was the 2017 president for the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, and during her tenure, she led the team that created that Code of Ethics for Healthcare Simulation Professionals. Welcome, Dr. Park. Next, we have Bob Kiser, who was unfortunately unable to join us for the second half of this day, but is in the presentation as well. And he is the Associate Director at the Simulation and Integrative Learning Institute at UIC College of Medicine. Next, we have Laura McKenzie, who also is an Assistant Director for Human-Based Simulation. And is joined also by Tanja, Barac, who is the Assistant Director of Technology-Based Simulation. So welcome to all three of you, and then missing our friend Bob Kiser, who is unfortunately unable to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get this presentation up and running. Again, put your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to ask them at the end of the presentation. Okay, Tanja, can you give me a thumbs up that you can see that? Okay, very good. And here we go.
And Integrative Learning Institute. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Park, and I'm the director of the Simulation and Integrative Learning Institute at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I'm here today with three of my SAIL colleagues.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bob Kiser. I'm the Associate Director of SAIL.
Hello, I'm Laura McKenzie, Assistant Director at SAIL.
And I'm Tanja, the other Assistant Director at SAIL.
So together, we'd like to welcome you to Healthcare Simulation Week 2022. And another little bit of interesting information, you might know that Bob Kiser and I are hosts of the Beyond Simulation podcast. But today, we're here to talk about how does our Code of Ethics, the Healthcare Simulation Code of Ethics, inform excellence in a new era. And we are going to do that as a snack-sized sim chat today. So I don't know about you, but when you take in the entirety of the Healthcare Simulationist Code of Ethics, it's kind of a lot to digest.
Right? Yeah, there's a lot there.
There is. So for today, what we'd like to do is focus in on just one of those core value areas, the one of mutual respect, and talk about how our experience as simulationists relates to this value. And what we derive from it. So as a brief review of this third core value, we're going to be talking about how is it that we respect the rights, dignity, and worth of all? And what does it look like to, for example, honor the knowledge, skills, and values and vulnerability of learners and colleagues? What is it like for us to listen to other points of view? Exhibiting humane behavior, honoring diversity, fostering inclusion. How do we make that real in our day-to-day lives at work? And what about maximizing safety and minimizing physical and psychological risk? And so without further ado, just diving right in, Bob, how does this core value area relate to you as a simulationist?
Thanks, Christine, for getting us started. So it relates to everything that I do and we do as simulationists. But as I was looking at this and thinking about this presentation, I was thinking specifically, how does it relate to how I interact with faculty or people using our Sim Center? Because I think it's unrealistic to ask them to read through this and to study this. So then how do we bring this to the forefront for them? An example of, like, I was thinking with faculty is that they will have experience in the hospital and even maybe a traumatic experience. And they'll bring it to our Sim Center saying, hey, let's reproduce this so our learners can go through it. And I think as a simulationist, it is my job, our job, to challenge that, well, maybe we don't want to reproduce that traumatic experience as it is here in the Sim Center because, well, question, do we want to traumatize our learners? We have control here at the Sim Center about what we produce. So in the hospital, of course, we can't control that. Things happen. But here, well, let's maybe create a bite size part of that experience and then have a really robust debriefing so that we don't have to traumatize, but that we can produce this learning experience for the learners. And then explaining that also then relates to how we as simulationists relate to the code of ethics and introducing it that way. I also was thinking of another way to maybe kind of introduce the idea of, especially this third domain, to our faculty, and that is something that we've created here at SAIL is a new template for our human-based simulation. And this template, so we're looking at what the template, challenging, like, how do we make sure that we are honoring diversity? How do we make sure that we're having inclusion in our cases and not just writing cases to throw things into the case to make them more challenging, which of course we want cases challenging, but to challenge to make sure that we're putting things in there consciously and deliberately. So in our template, with the choices that our faculty make, we ask them to say, so why are you making this choice? So you're saying this is a male, 35, why is it a male? Maybe it could be a female. Maybe it could be, a trans person. They could be non-binary. So why particularly are we making the choice for this case to be this demographic? And then going through the entire case, why are we choosing all the other items for it? But again, telling us to make sure that we're being deliberate in our choices. But again, I think it's this relationship to our faculty, and people may not be as knowledgeable about the code of ethics, but I still think have the same desire we have to create, ethical simulations and helping them with this. So I think that's where my mind went to when I thought about this.
That's really great, Bob. And one of the things that I like about the template is that we have really re-engineered the case design process to not start with the clinical syndrome itself, but more around some of the other principles that you were talking about. Right. So actually, what is your favorite part of the new template?
Favorite part of the new template. Okay, so we still have learning objectives, but we also added something else called experiential objectives. And so for this, we are asking the faculty or case writers, whoever they may be, what is the experience that you want the learners to have in the room? So not just what you want them to learn, their takeaways, of course we want that, but what is the experience that you want them to have, which actually helps us in creating these cases and kind of molding and also focusing them. So I think it's experiential objectives. So
I like that part too.
yeah, really cool. So okay, I'm going to throw it to Laura. So how does this relate to you as a simulationist?
Well, I love that you mentioned the experiential objectives, because I think for me, thinking about the vulnerability of our standardized patients, our instructors, and our learners, that in these experiences, what are they having to bring to these simulations? And as a simulationist, I have to be mindful and acknowledge the emotional and psychological toll that these simulations might take on our participants. And that's just given me a lot to think about, and in terms of how we approach the simulation, in terms of recruitment, training, and then debriefing. So some things that, you know, I have participated in would be creating a Zen room for the standardized patients to decompress after a psychiatry clerkship exam that was just very taxing. And it was a space for folks to, after a day of doing psych cases that, you know, were physically daunting, emotionally challenging, of some very sort of sensitive topics involved with those cases, a decompressing space for people to just relax, watch videos, listen to music, eat some chocolate, turn the lights off or down so that there were no fluorescents, and just hang out. And that's just an example of kind of how to debrief and take care of each other. Some other things that we're sort of toying with are, how do we include folks a little bit more in the process of inviting them to participate in simulations as standardized patients. You know, in the past, we would just sort of say, here's what this is about. Here are some sensitive subjects that might come up. We're toying with, well, should we just send the cases to people before we book them? Should we let them see every single detail so that they can make the decision for themselves? And that's still an open question for us. In the training of these cases, we have to acknowledge the difficulty that doing back-to-back scenarios might cause. So we need to think about building in breaks. We need to think about training, pacing. Pace yourselves. You don't have to operate at a 10 at every moment. Where can you find moments to be a 2, a 5, a 7? Setting boundaries for emotional responses. So these are things that, you know, we've been doing in our trainings. And lastly, I think just acknowledging that our lives are not static. We change as humans, and therefore we change what we're comfortable with, and just being open to people needing to bow out, needing to change responsibilities as their lives change.
I agree. I love that, you know, being conscious that we're all humans. So I want to go back to the Zen room. And we also, Zen room, we're actually using it with learners too now. We have a program called First Step. And so the learners, you know, thinking about when they go through these experiences. But okay, so I have a fun question though. So with the Zen room, especially for the SPs, what is your favorite type of videos to play?
Well, my favorite type, baby elephants. Hands down, but I think the SPs really liked to watch So You Think You Can Dance videos.
I like that. Wait, why baby elephants?
Because I mean, you can't see a baby elephant and not smile.
Okay, fair.
That's a fact. Thank you for that, Bob. See, I'm already smiling thinking about baby elephants. So Tanja, tell us a little bit about how this relates to you and your work at SAIL as a simulationist.
Yeah, and before I go into it, I want to say the students loved puppy videos, but like you said, I think baby anything miniature will make anyone laugh. So videos are definitely helpful in those Zen rooms. So for me and how this code of ethic, mutual respect kind of relates to me as a simulationist. So I think what the SAIL staff does really well here is meeting the learners at wherever they are when they walk through that door that day. I think that we do a really good job at knowing that we're, assuming that not everyone's going to be on their very best day. They're not going to be on their A game. Also just respecting what learner level that they're at and what skill level, because some students might progress quicker than others, and just acknowledging that, and also just realizing that we're all human and every day is going to be different. I think, Laura, you touched on that, pacing ourselves, knowing that one day you might be a 3 and tomorrow you might be a 10, and that's okay. And so I think our staff really does a good job at respecting that level changes amongst our learners and even ourselves. And so going into any program knowing that already sort of sets this this tone, this precedence that no matter what's going to happen today, it's going to be okay. We'll debrief in the end. And I think what SAIL does to make sure that, that we are all on the same page, we as in staff, students, and faculty, is we remind ourselves to create a respectful, non-judgmental space for all of us, especially our learners. And so in reminding us to do that, and sort of with reminding the students too, we've created a simulation agreement. And if I may, I'm going to share my screen. And full disclosure, the simulation agreement was inspired and used with permission from a work group from the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. And I think it really honestly hits almost every point of this mutual respect code of ethic. It covers all the bases, and it really just reminds us how to treat each other. So it sort of provides us with bylaws that we hope that the learners and staff and faculty abide by every time that they're here at the center. So, I mean, if we're looking at it, even this first one, making room for and finding worth in all voices, trying it on, owning this with us, saying what we feel is that we always want the students to feel comfortable doing, especially in a debrief post encounter. And then surfacing those cultural assumptions are just a few of those on the list, but you can kind of see how they all hit a lot of those points on this code of ethic, and really honors each other and our knowledge and our skill level, as I mentioned, and just listening to each other and seeking to understand why maybe you made the decision you did, but allowing us to have this safe space so that we feel brave to make some of those bolder decisions or those bolder interventions, let's say, or work as a team and kind of speak up for ourselves without feeling judgment. So I love this. I'm so grateful that we did this, because it really just puts it out there, like, this is how we should, these are our bylaws that we should follow every time that we're here. And we share this with our students during every orientation when they're here at the center. And I'm glad we did it, because I think they appreciate it too, that we are making this conscious effort to abide by that mutual respect. I think we're on to asking Christine, how does this relate to you as a simulationist?
Well, I have really loved all of this discussion. It's so amplifying, actually, to think about connecting it to this core value. And for me, I want to come back to the bullet point about, I'd connect to the notion of honoring the skills, values, and vulnerability of the learners and colleagues. And there's another group on there that we need to make sure to include, and that is the people with the lived experience that we are simulating. And it strikes me that we often talk about patient-centered care and patient-centered communication. And not to get too semantic about it, but there's a risk in a centering activity that there's a little bit of objectification. If you think we're all standing in a circle around someone in the center, that would be a patient or a person-centered activity. But does that patient actually feel like they're a partner in the process? So one of the things that I'm really proud of that we have undertaken at SAIL is to really walk the talk in terms of creating cases in a patient-partnered manner. And this means not relying on what we think we've seen or observed or heard about, but actually going directly to the groups with the lived experience. And we're talking, especially starting with those groups that are coming from marginalized and minoritized experiences. And so we have just embarked on that journey of conducting focus groups with different areas, and we are going to be analyzing those, incorporating their voices. And it doesn't end there. Once the focus group is over, we are going to continue in an iterative fashion to develop cases in a partnered manner. So I'm super excited about that.
Definitely food for thought.
Right. Well, I have one quick question. So for that, how then does the patient partner with us after we've done the main focus group? So how do you see that partnership happening?
I think there's so many different ways. One can be that those patients can be the SPs themselves. The other is that they can be part of piloting and training of cases. They can be consultants to even the clinical aspects of the case. Does it make sense if we said you should this or that, or this is your struggle? And we understand that one patient experiences is not emblematic of every patient with that particular, whatever it is we're trying to simulate, but we're not trying to represent that. What we're trying to do is increase representation of the voices that need to be at the table.
Very cool. Okay, and on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining the sales simulation team for this snack-sized sim chat, and we hope that you have a great healthcare simulation week.
All right, very good. Well, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for putting that together for us. And I'm happy to entertain some questions that anybody might have for us. So please put them in the chat. I'm going to start looking at them. So the first question I see here is a question of, do we have access to the template that Bob referred to?
Yeah, I can field that. So no, we are in kind of the last stages of beta where we're rolling out the template internally, but we would love to get feedback from anybody who would like to explore this and let us know their reactions to it. I think, do we have our, well, actually, what I'll do is I'll drop my email into the chat. So anybody who's interested, please do reach out and we would love to hear from you.
That's great. That would have been my follow-up to that. Maybe a question I could ask kind of in conjunction with that is, can you kind of talk about how you developed that template itself? You know, where are you at? I hear you said you're at beta testing still, but kind of how did that come about? How long has it taken you to develop that? And will you require all new simulations that are coming through to sign off on this template prior to any sim? So you maybe explore that a little bit more for us, that'd be great.
Sure, and it's a really great question. So we had a template that was very, I mean, it was clinically focused as it should be, but the engineering of that template was to start with the clinical syndrome and then build out all the rest of it. And it created, you know, some sort of phenomena where perhaps the humanitarian piece of it or the person's lived experience or even the learner experience that we want a little bit got lost in the mix. And for the sake of, I want to make sure that this chest pain case is exactly, you know, right. So instead, what we've done is we've re-engineered, you heard Bob refer to experiential objectives, and we start, before we can even talk about what clinical case you want, what experience do you want the learner to have? And that can be in a very colloquial sense. So we're not talking about the formalized language of learning objectives. We would want, for example, to say, we want the learners to feel excited that they got to use their new skills, or we want them to feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. We want them to, whatever it is. We have found that that has really anchored in almost a magical fashion the faculty's ability to think about their case and curate the case that they're writing. So we are rolling it out system-wide, and we're doing it gradually, so we're not making necessarily the old cases have to be adapted into the new template yet, but we will get there.
Great, thank you so much. I'm waiting for other questions to come in, but I have another question I can ask. Kind of going back to that Zen room, you know, talking about that just sounds so great. We don't have anything like that here, you know, in Madison, and I know that's something we'd be interested in exploring. How do you, as members of the SAIL group, how do you oversee that group? Do you sit in the Zen room with them, and how do you go about the debriefing with them, incorporating that mindfulness and that Zen space? Maybe just talk a little bit more about that. I'd love to hear a little bit more.
I can jump in. I'll start. So as far as the debriefing, I would debrief the program as per usual in our regular debriefing space, just to make sure that anything that happened during the encounters, any questions were addressed, and we could talk about the cases, portrayals, etc. And so we kept it in that particular debriefing room. Afterwards, anyone who wanted to join the Zoom room was invited to. It wasn't an obligation. If people needed to leave and go about their day, they were certainly welcome to do so. But it was just an invitation. When we first started it, I sort of set it up like I had the music going and the videos and different puzzles. People would like play games on the whiteboards. As we sort of developed it, it was a space where the SPs could do what they wanted. They could pull up their own videos and sort of use the space however, but we just wanted to make it a clear delineation that in that room, we weren't talking about the cases and we weren't talking about the encounters. Sometimes I hung out because, I love baby elephants. Sometimes I just went about my day.
And if I may add, we did open up the Zen room as an option for the students too. You may have heard us in the video talk about our First Death program that we've implemented a few years ago. And again, it's not an obligation. They don't have to, but if they definitely want to take a few minutes after the formal debrief just to, again, veg out, zen out, just sit and be amongst each other. We sometimes threw some candy in there, like little bite-sized things that can just help someone kind of overcome some of those more emotionally driven scenarios. So, we were happy to open up to the learners too.
Yeah. Oh, Christine, go ahead, please.
Shan, I was going to add in here, because we're really talking about that third value in the Code of Ethics, that one of the things that we have noticed over the years is we tend to think of learners and staff and faculty in almost like silos. And we are really attempting through all of these initiatives to think about what are the things that apply to everybody and what can be done in a really sense of mutual, I don't know, not activity, but sort of mutual engagement. And that kind of, if I could think about that as a theme that suffuses all of what we do, the simulation agreements, the Zen room, so forth, we're really thinking about them as applicable to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really important component to address. And so thank you so much for all your feedback on that. We did have another question in the chat. I see it, Christine did address it, but I'll go ahead and ask that if you want to maybe just speak a little bit about it. It says, can we say in other words that the new template can help with the validity and the reliability of the simulation scenario? We do that for assessment tools, but it may be applicable for scenarios too. So I don't know if someone wants to quickly comment on that.
I could try, and it's a big question. There's layers to this that we don't have time to explore, but in a word, yes, I think we're looking at trying to find validity and reliability in a different sense than just mere clinical accuracy. And as one example, if we want to create simulations for, let's say, debiasing or exploring implicit bias, we need to start with what is the learner journey going to be there. The whatever is a clinical syndrome almost is not an afterthought, but it's almost kind of the last piece of costuming that you put on. But the foundation of the experience comes from what the learner journey is going to be. And we have found that when that's the case, sometimes people will say, oh, I realize now that this particular clinical thing that I thought was going to be relevant actually doesn't fit as well as, I'd like to make some tweaks. So it's been transformative.
Well, that's great. Well, I have one quick question. Well, unless I don't see any other questions in the chat, I have one more question to maybe kind of end us with, but it might be longer than I want it to be. So here at UW-Madison, we're provisionally accredited by SSH, and now we're working towards our next level of accreditation. And some of the feedback that we had received was we really need to make sure that we have a good code of ethics. And we know, we see the template for what should be included in that, but just thinking of someone new to this, what one bit of advice would you give us as we create our own code of ethics here at the Sim Center in Madison, or to anywhere?
Tanja, Laura?
I think Christine brought up a great point, is to start thinking as, instead of splitting us up into silos, is really starting to be more inclusive of everyone, because we're all going through it. We're all seeing the same simulations. We're affected, we're triggered all in the same ways and differently. And I think just including not only your sim staff, but the students and faculty when you start to develop your code of ethics, so that everyone is respected mutually.
And I think reflecting on what Bob was talking about in terms of what is our responsibility in reproducing, and is reproducing an event what we're really after, or are we trying to bring one element of that we can then focus on and debrief and grow from, as opposed to reproducing for the sake of this could actually happen, because yes, many things can happen and many things can have harmful effects. And so taking a look at the role of simulation in terms of real life and the benefits and unintended consequences from trying to replicate real life.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we kind of stand behind is thinking about our work as an act of design. And if you think about a really great movie, nothing is an actual reproduction of the actual reality. It's all sort of designed for the experience. And that it's the thing that we've been thinking a lot about. And as Laura said, a lot of faculty come to us with just saying, oh, I had this case when I was a younger person, and I want to bring this. And we always start with, well, great. And why do you want the learner to have that experience? Oftentimes for themselves, it's almost like treating their own trauma. I want to sort of re-experience this in a controlled setting so that I can process the experience that I had all those years ago.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panel for that great presentation and the great conversation afterwards. And I encourage you to continue watching the rest of our Healthcare Simulation Week. And unless anybody else has anything else, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in another session.